I remember the first time I heard the term white women tears. It was so confusing to me. A lot of people in the room laughed, and I wondered what this meant, this term white woman tears. And I started to learn that it was a bad thing. That if a white woman were to cry in a diversity workshop setting, often what would happen is that the entire workshop would be derailed. And because all the attention would go to the white woman who was having such uncomfortable feelings, meanwhile, agendas were abandoned and the feelings of people of color who are experiencing racism were ignored. So I understood that that was something. I didn't want to be the white woman in the room who cried. Then I started to also hear, this is early in my waking up process, that white people in general, have a reputation for being sort of low on the feeling scale, a little aloof, a little cold, head and heart disconnected. I started to feel like, wait a second, like on the one hand, I'm being told I don't feel enough. On the other hand, I need to be careful I don't feel too much. And so I sort of felt like there were narrow parameters, and that didn't fit the idea of creating a more humane world. So I was a little paralyzed and confused. Also, around this time, I did start to develop a deeper understanding of just how powerful white women's tears were beyond the workshop setting in many instances of violence against black communities in the United States through history. Violence has been instigated by white women's tears. Think about the brutal murder of Emmett Till. Think about the burning down of Rosewood, Florida, the bombing of Black Wall Street. So it's not just derailing a little workshop. This is connected to a much larger phenomenon of multi generational terrorism. So that deepened my understanding of just why white women's tears might be so triggering. Then I was at a conference and I heard Robin DiAngelo say to a room of hundreds of white women, I was one of them, white women, your tears are a form of bullying. And in that moment, something clicked. And the first thing I thought of right there in that moment, in that conference room, was the day I got my license at age 16. And my mom said to me, if you get stopped by a policeman, just cry and get out of your ticket. And, I did that a few times and it worked really well. So I was sitting there having that memory and having just heard Robin's words, thinking, well, wow, there is this form of crying I've done that's to get out of stuff. And I remembered my early marriage when my husband would want to talk about something, point out something that wasn't working for him about me, or I would cry. Just, it was so hard to hear about that. And he would often say, okay, it's not that big a deal. Like, we don't have to talk about this. Fascinating. So that would get me out of having to hear something negative about myself. It also meant we weren't resolving issues. So it's a really dysfunctional way of being in the world. So this really opened up an interesting thought process for me, turning over this idea. And I started to make a connection that may be obvious to you, but it wasn't obvious to me, that there is a connection between being taught to use tears to get out of situations and an utter lack of tools to really intelligently, robustly, courageously navigate conflict or manage myself in a really difficult, emotionally difficult situation. I just was not raised with that set of tools. In fact, I was raised to avoid conflict. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Don't rock the boat. I think white tears are, um, whether they're intentional or unintentional, they come from this place of not being taught more mature ways to navigate the world. And of course, it's in the interests of some people for women to stay weak. So if I've come out of childhood with zero conflict navigation skills, then crying becomes, as a way to get out of things, becomes even more important. And I think a lot of this, the ways that we are socialized are embodied. So I don't think it's even a conscious decision. I want to get out of this, therefore I'll start crying. I think it becomes sort of reflexive. In me, I think it became reflexive. So, a really, really important piece of developing myself as an engaged participant in any kind of a cross racial friendship initiative is to learn to develop the skills, the conversational skills to really navigate conflict courageously, boldly, respectfully, honestly, so that I have something better than tears to fall back on. The other piece I've realized is skill is not enough. I also need to simultaneously be developing my own emotional capacity. I did suffer from white fragility, and the antidote for me has been, as I say, not just skills, but really learning to grow my emotional capacity, my ability to be resilient, my ability to be really uncomfortable, stay in the conversation, maybe even have some tears rolling down my face, but say, I don't need anybody to take care of me. Like, I'm okay. I'm having some feelings, but let's keep going. I want to work through this with you. Those are kind of important skills to have, not just in a racial, an anti racist racial justice setting, but they're important life skills for our personal relationships and our work relationships, just in life. You know, racial justice for me is really about reclaiming my own humanity. And it's interesting how white tears have been a window into understanding how pieces of my humanity were allowed to atrophy in the name of um, keeping me in my place so I could keep others in their place.